We have Mika tonight. I've got to say, this is one of the most fascinating debates in that you just don't know what's going to happen. You're going to be holding your breath, wondering what's going to come out of each one of these guys' mouths, wondering if they're going to be able to complete the sentences, wondering if they're going to just walk off stage halfway through. I mean, this is going to be the sort of terror that's going to seize both sides every bit as much as it did we Republicans for the 3 debates in 2000 when George W. Bush was behind the microphone.
Not even close.
And Al Gore managed to lose all 3
Think
debates.
about that. Okay, also
all 3
with
debates.
us, Deputy Managing Editor for Politics at Politico, Sam Stein, who, Sam parle en français.
Yes,
ce matin, you were doing a great job with the French names for the NBA draft and way too early.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm global. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also with us, NBC News national affairs analyst John Heilman.
Yes.
He is a partner and chief political columnist at Puck and MSNBC contributor and author of the
Luck.
Yes. Okay, and author of the book How the Right Lost Its Mind, Charlie Sykes. Oh my God,
For the first time in 40 years, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are going to go face to face tonight in Atlanta. Sources familiar with Biden's plans tell NBC News the president's going to travel directly from Camp David to Georgia later today after a week of intense preparation at his Maryland retreat. That prep will reportedly include both dress rehearsal style mock debates and informal huddles with advisors. He's been doing that today. They'll make him most likely. He's just going to rest and watch Morning Joe on a loop.
Contrary to claims from Trump's team, Biden campaign sources say the president has maintained his executive schedule while at Camp David and that only part of his days have been spent on debate prep. As for the former president, the Biden campaign believes Trump is preparing more for tonight's debate than he has been letting on publicly. They are bracing for Trump to arrive in Atlanta, quote, more disciplined than on past occasions.
This guy's going to be
but have been strategizing ways to get under the former president's skin to remind Americans of his more uncontrollable side.
Really, I don't. How do you get under Donald Trump's skin? Come on, this guy is a professional.
It's so thin.
It's like he said, he's been doing this forever. He spent his entire life on television. He spent his entire life debating. I mean, he would really have to screw things up to not win this going away tonight.
Yeah, he said he didn't really need to prepare for the debate because his life has prepared him. He's so well versed in these issues. He gets right to the point. He stays on message. He doesn't meander, so we'll be expecting more of that tonight. Biden's campaign also said the president likely will bring up Trump's felony convictions during the debate. The campaign putting out a statement yesterday that reads, Donald Trump is a twice-impeached 34-time convicted felon whose record of attempting to overthrow democracy, promising to enact revenge against his enemies, and inciting political violence at every opportunity makes it clear he belongs nowhere near the White House. He'll have to answer for his priors in front of tens of millions of American voters. We will be watching his priors. That's the way, Jonathan. You talk about a convicted felon. So, John, you've been reporting this deeply on both sides. What do you expect to see in that room tonight?
I mean, it is going to be a contentious debate this evening. Certainly, the President Biden, as outlined there, is going to try to be very assertive and aggressive, going after Donald Trump for a number of things, including who won the 2020 election, put him on the spot, make him say again the big lie, to talk about January 6th, defense of democracy at home and abroad. We'll hear from him about abortion rights. And indeed, he will talk about he will talk about Donald Trump's convicted felon, and he'll try to make that argument that the conviction is just another sign of Trump doing whatever it takes to look out for himself while ignoring the American people. Now, I've been talking to those involved in the Biden debate camp at Camp David. Yes, there is the possibility that Donald Trump will come out tonight more disciplined, but they think that won't last, and President Biden is going to aim to provoke him. They're on the defensive as well. They know Trump's going to come at him swinging on immigration, on inflation, potentially Hunter Biden's conviction. They say to President Biden that, hey, it'd be okay to flash a little bit of anger at that. That's a human response, and so many Americans can relate to a loved one battling addiction. But let's just be clear about this. The stakes here are really high, and both sides know it. This has been a static race within a few points throughout. That's partially why the Biden team wanted this debate so early, to get Americans to pay attention, to kind of drag Donald Trump back into their living rooms and say, look, this is the choice. Biden versus Trump. You may not be thrilled with that choice, and polls suggest a lot of Americans aren't, but you're going to have to make a decision here. This is the race. And they think this is a moment where the president can not only quiet the doubters, much like he did at the State of the Union, that he's still up for the job, but he can once again paint Donald Trump as fundamentally unfit and dangerous to hold that office again.
Jonathan is right that Americans, and you know this, talking to people all the time, are kind of looking away from this campaign at this point. They go, ugh, these two guys again. This is a moment when the country really is going to tune in, even if just for one night, and perhaps form lasting impressions. And as John says, both of the campaigns are very aware of that. So you're going to be down there tonight in Atlanta. What do you expect to see?
Well, I guess first, one thing to say about this is, you know, Joe's right in saying this. It is, you know, given the two candidates, there's, you know, the possibility that something will happen outside the bounds of what anyone expects, you know, in any direction is reasonable. Yeah. So, like, making predictions about what's going to happen in the debate, you know, the likeliest thing is that Joe Biden's going to, especially with the expectations have been lowered for him by Republicans for months, stupidly, that he's going to overperform their expectations and that he's going to do what he did in the State of the Union. That's, you know, that's the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome on Donald Trump's side is that he's going to be, you know, Donald Trump. We're not clear that Trump has any other mode than the Trump than what we've seen. I think one of the things about having this thing so early is that the Biden campaign pushed for it to be early. They didn't push for it to be early because they thought that what would happen here was that with the 6% of undecided, persuadable, available voters in the 6 states that are in play, 6 or 7 maybe states that are battleground states, that people were going to have their mind changed tonight in that group. If you haven't decided between Donald Trump and Joe Biden at this point, an event that would change your mind tonight and would hold for until November is a pretty unlikely thing. This is like a moment like the State of the Union for Biden to calm nervous Democrats, to frame the race going forward. We're going to have these big events coming forward. We got the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. You've got Trump's VP pick. You've got the Republican convention. Those are in the next 2 weeks after this debate. And I think the way the Biden campaign thinks about this is a kind of like the starting bell in a way for the general election, where they can get up in front of this big audience and say, this is what the choice is going to be about over the course of these next months. We're going to fight this thing out. But for those undecided voters, their decisions are likely to come much later. And there are a lot of events that are going to occur between now and November. So I don't think you're going to see, when we see a lot of the instant polling and the numbers that people look at, that's the thing to really talk about in the next few days. Realize this is a really early debate, and a lot of stuff is still going to happen between now and November that are going to actually make up the minds of the people who count.
And add to that list of stuff that's going to happen, Joe, the sentencing of Donald Trump on July the 11th on those 34 felony convictions.
Right. I mean, yeah, this is so early. This is, unless this political campaign is different from every other American political campaign. I mean, the thing I learned very early on in campaigning was, as far as spending and when undecideds like really began to focus, it's old, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes when they're right up on you the final 2-3 weeks. And really, charitably, for the undecideds, a lot of them just make up their mind the last week, the last 3 or 4 days when they're going into the voting booth. So this really is, Charlie Sykes, a lot like a preseason game. It's June. The election's in November. There are, you know, the famous, I think it was, maybe it was Harold Wilson or Macmillan who said in politics, a week is a lifetime. We still have 5.5 months until this. This is really, really early, isn't it?
You know, I'm really glad you're giving us this reality check because, look, of course, this debate is pivotal. It's incredibly important. But we live in an era of just constant amnesia. I mean, you do this every day, right? And sometimes at the end of the week, you look back and say, what actually happened this week?
Exactly.
Something that happened 2 weeks ago feels like it happened in a completely different era. So I think that's important. And as for, undecided voters, there was a survey in Wisconsin yesterday of registered voters that found the race tied 50-50, which is amazing because that means there's no undecided voters out there. So again, there's a lot of things that are going to happen, and as John Heilman pointed out, you're going to have this post-debate spin that is going to be as significant as anything that happened. But I am fascinated by all the discussion about expectations, who's going to show up, what's going to happen. We don't know, but we do know one thing: Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump. Donald Trump is either going to be the unhinged howler monkey or, and I've heard a lot of speculation about this, a lot of pundits, saying, well, maybe we'll get the more low energy Donald Trump. Maybe we will get the more disciplined and presidential Donald Trump. That Donald Trump doesn't exist. Right. And keep in mind that if you have a 90-minute debate in which the temperature is low, one thing we're going to discover or be reminded about Donald Trump is that he doesn't really know anything about anything. Now, I don't think that this debate is going to turn on policy or substance, but if it does, just think about it. How much does Donald Trump know about substance and policy? How many questions can he answer about substance and policy? Right. At his rallies, at his interviews? Think about what he actually talks about. I mean, he's doing this non-prep where he's doing softball interviews and doing the rallies. Listen to what he says when he is unscripted. Listen to what he says when he's off the hook. So I'm going to be fascinated by seeing how does Donald Trump react to not having an audience? How does Donald Trump react to actually having hostile interviewers? How does Donald Trump have to react when he is trying to pretend or be the reality star who wants people to think that he's presidential? It's going to be the one thing we know about tonight is it's not going to be boring.
I don't want to lower expectations because that's what everybody's doing, and all that does is help Biden. And if you watch Biden throughout his career, the one thing that he has done well is in debates. I've been fortunate to be to Camp David a number of times, and this is where I'm concerned. He is taking this serious. He has spent 1 week at Camp David only focused on debates. People are throwing questions at him left and right. Think about the number of hours he's gone just for these 90 minutes. I have dealt with this man when he was a senator, when he was a vice president, and when he was president. And I will tell you, he's not the same person he was before. And as he was president, there were different moments. Every time I met with him, you got a different Joe Biden. And there's times that he was really engaging. I remember talking to him when he was Air Force One, coming back from a G7 meeting, and he could tell me all the different meetings he had. He was fully engaged, and the next day I met with him, and it was a totally different Joe Biden talking off cards. So let's not lower expectations. He's going to be prepared, the best he's ever going to be prepared.
Wait a minute. I thought he was slipping.
He's gone.
And that he's kind of like not there in meetings.
Poor Kevin.
Kevin can't get it right.
Mike Kevin, Mike Kevin's slipping, Willie, because Mike Kevin will say...
Mike Kevin doesn't remember what he told the Wall Street Journal.
He doesn't remember what he told the Wall Street Journal. He doesn't even remember...
And the host can't keep a straight face
what he told the Wall Street Journal about the meeting where he had said something a month prior that Biden was so on top of it that he looked forward to talking to him every day that week, and Biden was in complete control of the meeting. Poor Kevin. Kevin's slipping.
So which is it,
I've talked to Kevin. Some days Kevin's with it, some days Kevin's not. But let me tell you, be afraid of Kevin. Be very afraid of Kevin like a shark. Like, you should be as afraid of Kevin as you are riding in a boat with an electric motor with sharks swirling all around you, because that's how great Joe Biden's going to be.
Wait.
But he could be slipping, Willie. Help me. I'm so confused.
Yeah, and considering, as you mentioned, he was the source, along with Speaker Johnson, of that explosive front-page Wall Street Journal piece about Joe Biden's mental acuity. After long praising Joe Biden, he was the source of that story. You can see there that that's sort of now a correction of the low expectations that have been set by Donald Trump and so many people, that Joe Biden is a doddering old man, and all of a sudden they're worried he's going to do well. So they're talking again in the New York Post today. They have a full-page piece with a list of the drugs they speculate Joe Biden could be on during the debate tonight. So that's where they are. I wonder, are the
Murdochs proud of that? I mean, are the Murdochs proud of that? Are the Murdochs proud of the fact that they lie about Joe Biden on page 1 of the Wall Street Journal? Like, just an absolute great institution, the Wall Street Journal. I think with a great editor, I mean, you see what's happened over the past several months, and I really love the direction the Wall Street Journal's been going. But they somebody puts a garbage piece on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, a clear lie, and people in the media world, even conservatives, scratching their head going, never seen anything like this before. And now Murdoch's New York Post is talking about what drugs a presidential candidate is going to be taking.
Yeah,
are they really proud of what this Australian is doing to America? Is he really? I mean, how low is Rupert Murdoch going to go here? I'm just wondering how much lower does he have to go? Is there no bottom? We're talking about drugs. Why don't they just say, we're afraid Donald Trump is going to humiliate himself tonight, and so we have to come up after lying about Joe Biden, Rupert Murdoch's New York Post, lying about Joe Biden and these cheat fakes. Now they follow up where there's no way they're going to cheat fake their way out of if Biden has a good night. He may not have a good night. But if Biden has a good night, what are they going to do after their lies? Will they be caught once again lying to their readers over and over and over again, whether it's about parachutes or meetings at the G7? I mean, Willie, it's just, I can't even believe, even I am shocked that they're now doing this.
Yeah, I mean, they're preparing their readers and their viewers for the possibility that Donald Trump is going to do terribly tonight, and then therefore there will be a reason for it. Well, the moderators were unfair, or Joe Biden was on drugs. No one's talking affirmatively in any of this coverage about Donald Trump. They're trying to find these angles in on Joe Biden. Even the banner when we were playing that soundbite, Joe Biden spends a week at theater camp. It's called debate prep. Presidents, including Republicans, by the way, have done it for generations. But because Donald Trump doesn't do it, they have to reframe all of it. Let's go to the debate side. Claire McCaskill, just your view about the lead up this debate and what we might see tonight.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch the Republicans try to back the truck up about expectations of Joe Biden's performance. Listen, all Joe Biden has to do is come out there and be Scrappy Joe Scranton, as my friend Jim Palmieri likes to call him, and throw some haymakers. He needs to tell him to shut up. He needs to tell him to quit lying. He needs to be a street fighter tonight. He doesn't need to be as presidential as he's inclined to try to be. In policy is great, but it's more important that he get under Donald Trump's skin. And the way you get under Donald Trump's skin is you confront him with his BS. And I'm hoping that Joe Biden does that. And I have a feeling that's what they've been preparing for at Camp David.
So, Tim, talk to us about what punches Biden should throw, those haymakers. What particular vulnerabilities should he try to strike? And just give us a 30,000-foot sense as to the stakes of tonight. This has been billed as the most important debate in generations. Do you agree?
I think it's really important for Joe Biden. And a big part of this is, if you just look at the numbers, we're trying to figure out Democratic Senate candidates are running ahead of Joe Biden. Like, why is that? What is underneath that? And I think a part of it is there's a certain type of voter that hasn't tuned in as much, that is part of the Democratic coalition, that's a little worried about his age. Maybe they're unhappy about inflation. And if Joe Biden shows that he's the vigorous Joe Biden that he showed at the State of the Union, if he reminds those voters why they hate Donald Trump, because most of the voters don't like Donald Trump at all, then I think that he is poised to gain a couple of points in the polls and win some of those folks back. So I think you got to go after Trump on his extremism, obviously on social issues, on issues like abortion. But you also have to trigger Donald Trump a little bit. You know, my colleague at the board, Mark Caputo, said that Trump might seem irrational, and he's mostly irrational, but he's got a lizard brain, and he knows that he botched the first debate last time. And so he's going to try to soften his edges a little bit. And I think that Joe Biden's got to, make sure that he gets under his skin a little bit and get the crazy Donald Trump that we all know and love, out on the debate stage tonight.
You know, Doris, tonight's debate is going to be a fascinating trip back to the future. You have to go back to 1960. Of course, a presidential debate you know very much, you know about, you've written about eloquently, the Kennedy-Nixon debate, where there's no studio audience. And it was so fascinating hearing the stories after, time began. People listening on the radio thought Nixon won. People watching on television thought Kennedy won. But again, without an audience cheering, it was really left to the viewer to draw their conclusions. And we're going to have the same thing tonight.
Absolutely right. You know, what's interesting is the debate did not have to become a tradition after 1960. In fact, Eisenhower had warned Nixon not to do it. Don't give Kennedy the advantage of standing side by side with you. And then in 1964, it was told to LBJ. In fact, my husband wrote a memo to him and said, "Don't debate. You're the president of the United States. Don't give your opponent the stature to stand next to you." Then, of course, in 68 and 72, Nixon was not to make the same mistake twice, right? So it took 1976 for Ford, who was behind in the polls, to decide that he wanted to debate Carter because he needed the debate, he thought, which of course ended up being a mistake, since on the second debate he was asked a question about the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and he said, "No, there's no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there'll never be one in a Ford administration." Max Frankel tried to give him a second chance to get it right, and he still did it wrong. And the problem was it reinforced that feeling that he was ill-informed or not very smart. But then after that, the debates continued. As you know, they got audiences, they got people interrupting one another. They lost that sort of centrality of two people talking straight to the camera as they did in 1960. And tonight we're going to have that more. We've gone back to that so that we can focus on it. What everybody's saying about expectations, all that matters is we've got two guys tonight. They'll be live next to each other, and that's what people are going to want to see. And the people themselves are going to make up their mind as to whether or not they talked to them, whether or not they said the truth, whether or not they were believable, whether or not they cared about their problems. I can't wait. The whole country, I'm sure, is both anxious and excited about what's going to happen tonight.
Yeah, Mike, Doris is right. This is a real tune-in moment for a country that has tuned out this campaign. A lot of people have. Outside of our world of political junkies, people are just sort of sick of seeing these two guys and say, "Call me after Labor Day." But tonight will be interesting for many of the reasons that Doris laid out, including the fact that it's not a rally. You're not going to hear big applause and hooting and hollering when Donald Trump says something. It's just going to sit there. If he says he won the 2020 election, the moderators have time to jump in and follow up. The format will be fascinating to watch.
It is. It's going to be fascinating to watch for a number of reasons. First of all, I don't think any of us really appreciate the tumult that has really rocked this nation for several years. Parts of this country has never really gotten over COVID and the shutdowns after COVID. I mean, they're still living with the consequences of that, especially if you have school children who miss 2 years of school, things like that. So tonight, I think President Biden's principal job, and Claire alluded to it, is to remind an unfocused nation on who the opponent is, to remind a nation of who Donald Trump is and what Donald Trump did and did not do during his presidency. It's going to be interesting to see how he does it. I think he's going to be fairly tough on Trump to try and get him react. And again, to Claire's point, to get him to overreact, perhaps. And shutting off the microphones won't make any difference if Trump really overreacts. You'll hear him. And I think that's what they're banking on. Jonathan, you've been there. You're there today, obviously. What's your sense of the internals in the Biden campaign prep in terms of reminding the country of who Donald Trump was as president?
Yeah, that's key to what they want to do. They want to draw a contrast between Biden and Trump, and they also want to lift the sense of Trump amnesia that has settled across a lot of the country here, who just have this gauzy remembrances, oh, the economy was good or something, and instead forget a lot of the day-to-day dramas here and the tumult. So I've been told that Biden will indeed push the idea of the convicted felon. That's a phrase we'll likely hear tonight from him. He's going to, of course, talk about abortion rights. He's going to talk about January 6th. He's going to talk about the 2020 election and try to get Donald Trump to repeat the big lie in front of a national television audience. So Claire, we've outlined here in the last few minutes the way that Biden is going to go on the attack, but let's talk a little bit about how he's going to have to play some defense too. Donald Trump's team is previewed. Yes, we're going to hear about Hunter Biden, but more than that, it's going to be about immigration and inflation. How should the president respond?
Well, I think Biden has a pretty good story to tell about the immigration issue. All Biden has to do is focus the audience on the fact that he was for the toughest immigration bill in decades, and Donald Trump stopped it. And so he had to take action. And since he took action, the border crossings are down by 40% already. So you see, first, Donald Trump blocking because he didn't want a political win for his opponent, once again being selfish, putting himself before country, and then Joe Biden taking decisive action and getting good results. As long as he keeps it in that contrast, he's going to be fine on immigration. The key here is, and I think you see it in some of the pre-debate stuff from the Biden campaign, they want to remind people that Donald Trump is all about himself and Joe Biden is about you. And I think you'll hear that theme over and over again, running through all the contrasts that Biden will try to draw.
Yeah, Biden and his surrogates really coalescing all around that idea as one of their central themes between now and November. So, Tim, tell us a little bit more about what else you're looking out for tonight. I think we should expect the president to make a robust defense of democracy at home and abroad. And the foreign policy doesn't usually sway too many voters' minds. You know, Ukraine and the Russian invasion might.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be too hard for starters to get Donald Trump to repeat the big lie. So I think that's a good low bar for the Biden campaign to start with. I think he'll be able to do that pretty easily. And on the foreign policy, yeah, I talked earlier about how, Biden does have to speak to his base, the soft parts of his base. But then the Nikki Haley voter, right, the Ukraine and commitment to democracy at home and abroad, that is going to be the issue for the Bulwark folks, my folks. Can you get to those suburban, college-educated Republicans who don't know what's happening at the Wall Street Journal? I think it's getting a little crazy over there. With their attacks on Joe Biden, and can he contrast with Trump on that and put Trump in this box where Trump is defending Putin, Trump is attacking our allies at NATO, and he's attacking our institutions at home? Yeah, I think that's a good run of issues for Biden. He's got to be careful on foreign policy because the other side of that coin is Trump is going to say, the world's on fire, everything's crazy, everything was calm when I was here. And I think that one of the challenges President Biden is going to have is not being too defensive on those questions, staying on the attack, having crisp answers about what he's been doing, but also attacking Donald Trump, on the ways that he's going to alienate us in the world.
Let's get more into that because Donald Trump claims, and some polls show, he's received more support from Black and Hispanic communities, but he says he's enjoyed that support because of the mugshot that was taken last summer when he was charged in the Georgia election interference case. Trump's remarks came during a Black American business leaders barbershop roundtable hosted by Ben Carson and Congressman Byron Donalds and Wesley Hunt, where he spoke to the panel by phone, saying his support from Black voters has, quote, gone through the roof because Black Americans can relate to his being a felon.
But since this has happened, like the mugshot is the best. It just beat Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra by a lot, by the way. Beat him by a lot. But that's the #1 mugshot of all time. It's really an amazing thing. Since it happened, the support among the Black community and the Hispanic community has skyrocketed. It's been amazing. Really been amazing. It's been actually very nice to see.
Rev, can you think of anything more patronizing than saying Black voters like me because I've been arrested, because I have a mugshot, because I am a felon, and just saying it explicitly the way he's saying it?
And really insulting them in their face, saying that because I have a mugshot, because I'm a criminal, Blacks like me. And if that is not criminalizing Blacks, I mean, do we not have an insult level? If any president had said that to any other ethnic group, it would be outrage. It is insulting. It shows what he thinks of us. And he does think of us. I think of us that way. I come from New York like he does. Every chance he got, including Central Park 5, he supported the criminalizing of Blacks. He called for the death penalty of 5 innocent young Black men. So that's what he thinks of us. The irony is he's got some sitting there applauding it. Why wouldn't you tell Black businessmen how Black businesses benefited under your 4 years in office? He couldn't say that because it didn't happen.
So, Simone, as you look at that scene yesterday, a barbershop set up, Donald Trump not there, calling in on a speakerphone and saying what he said yesterday, what do you see in that?
Well, yeah, what I would like to say is that appropriate for national television. So I would just say, you know, and, you know, Reverend Sharpton is sitting there, and I respect the Rev. What I see there is, you know, folks really love to throw the term pandering around when it comes to Democrats and black voters. But what Donald Trump is doing is a level of insult and pandering, and I'm unsure about who he is pandering to. You know, about having folks like Byron Donalds and Ben Carson, whom know better, right? Sit there and allow this gentleman who says he wants the votes of black voters in this country to call into a black voter roundtable at the barbershop with black business owners to talk about his mugshot and his felonies is the epitome of spitting in the face of black people. And I just really have to wonder about the black elected officials, the black leaders in their respective communities who are propping Donald Trump up and letting him spit in their faces. So when I talk about the fact that, you know, voters, they're black voters, base voters that are, I don't really know what I'm going to do this election. I don't think the woman that I referenced in Virginia is deciding if she's really going to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. It's like, am I going to vote for Joe Biden or am I fighting the couch? But what Donald Trump is doing cannot be excused. This is not outreach. This is insult. And I hope that he's asked about that on the debate stage tonight.
You know, Jen Palmieri, we shouldn't be surprised, but at times we are surprised, or at least I'm surprised, about how everything, no matter what it is, about Donald Trump makes it about himself. The #1 mugshot of all time. That's the quote he had about his mugshot. It's the #1 mugshot of all time. Bigger than Elvis's, bigger than Frank Sinatra's. So tonight, from your perspective, having been around campaigns and handling candidates in campaigns who are preparing for a debate, what about the idea that while all elections are about the future, it seems now in this cultural weird time that we're living in that nobody remembers things that happened 2 months ago or certainly 3 or 4 years ago. There's very little recollection or real feeling about what happened on January 6th in the Capitol, the COVID and shutting down schools. That seems to be a distant memory to a lot of people. But what about the idea of the President of the United States standing on a stage and reminding people that while he is president, how would you like to wake up the morning after election realizing that the United States is represented in the Oval Office by a convicted felon? Things like that. Just going right at it right away. What would your advice be?
I mean, it's, you know, you're thinking, who's your audience, right? I mean, there's Trump's base. You can't worry about them. So your audience, there is, I mean, Simone makes a very good point that part of this debate is designed, needs to, there's a lot about Joe Biden we don't know in terms of what he's accomplished. And he needs to spend, you got to come out of this with a sense of, oh, he has actually accomplished a lot that's making a difference in my life. There's a new foundation here, and he can grow from that in term 2. So you can't lose sight of that. But there's that, you know, the Haley voters, the independents that are concerned about the conviction, that need to hear that. I think I'd say that kind of, as you said, like Mike, a grounded, sober assessment of what that would be like for the United States of America to elect a convicted felon to sit in the Oval Office, and what a mockery that could make of our democracy. And I think I continue to believe the most effective way to use, but I think the most effective way to use this felon charge against, or felon conviction against Trump, is to say he did not accept the results of the Iowa caucus in 2016. He did not accept the results of the election in 2020, and he will not accept the results of this fair trial. He will not live by the rules of democracy, and he can never be in the Oval Office again.
Trial proceedings began yesterday behind closed doors in Russia in the case of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Taken into custody on espionage charges in March of last year, Gershkovich is considered wrongfully detained. That's the U.S. government assessment. It's unclear what happened in court yesterday. We don't know exactly how long the trial might last. His next hearing is set for August the 13th. Join us now, Dow Jones CEO and publisher of the Wall Street Journal, Almar Latour. Also with us, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. Almar, I'll start with you. Obviously, front page above the fold this morning in the Wall Street Journal is Evan's trial. And just below that, a chilling image of Evan in court, first day of his trial with a shaved head. What's your reaction to the beginning of this trial?
Well, unfortunately, it's playing out in as grim a fashion as we had anticipated. It's farcical proceedings with a sham trial based on a lie. Evan looks emaciated in that photo. They shaved his head. He's been moved into a new prison facility because the trial, the court proceedings moved from Moscow to Yekaterinburg, where he's now in a cell for 4 people. We believe he has so far 1 cellmate. But the trial itself is a mystery. The proceedings themselves are a mystery. It's Kafkaesque. You're not, our lawyers are not allowed to talk to us. The very lawyers that we've retained cannot share anything about the trial, or they will be charged with espionage. And so all of this is a fiction. All of this is part of the autocratic playbook.
And this, if he's found guilty, which, as we've noted, more than 90% of these cases in this court, they do reach a guilty verdict. He faces up to 20 years in prison. I want to respect your private negotiations and conversations behind the scenes because it is so sensitive. But to the extent you can share, are there glimmers of hope when you talk to intermediaries, when you perhaps have direct discussions and negotiations with Russian authorities?
Yeah, not once throughout this process have we lost hope. There have definitely been ups and downs. I can't speak to the very specific developments right now, but people are working around the clock, not just U.S. officials, but allied nations as well. And so we feel very supported. The family feels supported. I know Evan feels that support as well, and we will get him out.
So, Joe, a statement from Evan's family yesterday talking about the just excruciating last 15 months since Evan was snatched and put into prison on sham charges of espionage.
It is. It's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking for the family, and obviously, Almar, heartbreaking for the family of journalists at the Wall Street Journal who have, for years, provided Americans and the world some of the greatest reporting across the world. One of Mika's relatives who was on the show yesterday was a Wall Street Journal reporter in a similar beat. How is this impacting your news gathering? Obviously, it breaks everybody's heart. But what tough decisions are you all having to make about how you cover the world and continue shining a light on the darkness in Russia?
Well, thank you. First of all, we have a relatively new editor, Emma Tucker, who has led with grace throughout this whole ordeal. And I believe that this is really a moment for our particular journalism coming really close to our purpose, to really double down on that purpose of bringing reliable information to a world in which reliable information is hard to come by. So I think everyone is extra motivated. At the same time, it's very precarious right now to be a reporter in hotspots around the world, and so we proceed with caution. We have a security protocol in place that we've tightened up even more, but we are doubling down on our mission.
Yeah. And we've said on the show, I certainly have said many times, even if we had problems with a story or two, what an extraordinary job we think Emma Tucker is doing over at the Wall Street Journal has really breathed life into the publication over the past 6 months or so, and has highlighted this issue time and again, Richard Haass, which is what the family has to be heartened by how the Wall Street Journal has stood shoulder to shoulder. I am curious, though, how do we deal with a a superpower, or at least a country that considers itself still to be a superpower, when they keep kidnapping our journalists, our athletes, and just American citizens that are kidnapped by Vladimir Putin and then exchanged later for international fugitives, international thugs, like weapons dealers, merchants of death.
And Joe, I wish I could give you a good answer. I was involved in trying to get American hostages out of Lebanon years ago when I worked at the White House. And it's just one of the most frustrating things. The more you talk about it, the more you try. In some ways, it's a real dilemma, because then it signals, wow, this is really valuable. What else can we get from you Americans? Right. So it's just a dilemma for the government. And it's also here, the question, I think, is what's motivating Russia? I'd actually be curious in your sense. To what extent do you think this is to intimidate, to basically show all journalists, you cover us in certain ways, we're going to get you? To what extent have you gleaned from your contacts with them that this is also potentially a way to set up a trade? Again, I don't want to go too far, but what you think is motivating it?
Yeah, well, traditionally, these types of cases have led to a trade of some sort, and that is definitely one of the motivations that we discern. And that's, I think, a level of effort that's going into a trade from the U.S. side and from allies around the world. That's one thing. I think the motivation is also to humiliate the West and to humiliate free press and to serve up an example to say, hey, do not write about us in any unfavorable manner.
Elmer, the negotiations for Evan's release are obviously sensitive, and much of it, all of it, probably behind the scenes. We don't know much about what's going on publicly, nor should we know. But obviously, again, the insertion of domestic politics into this popped up yesterday. Former President Donald Trump on his Truth Social platform said, wrote, "Fear not, Evan. I will get you home soon, and you will be safe while there," unquote. What's your reaction when you see that?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the specific posting, but we've seen bipartisan support throughout the past 15 months. And so that is continuing in some form. We hope that Evan can come home sooner than the election, when we're working toward that and putting a spotlight on Evan for that very purpose, to try and get him home now. I know a lot of work is taking place. I do think it's important, per your comments just now, Dick, that there is a debate on how we're going to end the hostage-taking industry by autocrats. And that is really putting pressure on journalists all over the world. And you see this behavior being mirrored in other nations as well. And so I think that is a legitimate debate to have, but that's apart from that particular posting.
And Alan, what can Americans watching right now, watching this show, watching other shows that want to help, what can they do?
Well, first of all, join in the discussion. Start conversations around this. Wear a button like the one I'm wearing right now. Why is that important? I may not feel at an individual level like you're contributing, but you are, because there needs to be an awareness that free press is under assault. Without free press, there is no free society. This is something that we hold very dear. If we let this slip out of control, there'll be a high price to pay, not just in Russia, but potentially elsewhere as well. And so I think this is one of the most important discussions that we should have in this country and around the world.
Reading from that statement from Evan's family yesterday, quote, "We miss our son and we just want him home. We all hope he comes home soon. We stand with Evan and we stand with you, and we'll stay on this story." Dow Jones CEO and publisher of the Wall Street Journal, Almar Latour, thanks so much for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for your support.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.